Unfortunately, mass shootings are a thing we've become used to, but the evidence doesn't quite fit the story for this one. Follow me down the rabbit hole about the Las Vegas shooting. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about the Mandalay Bay shooting, the Las Vegas shooting of October 1st, 2017, the Route 91 Harvest Country Music Festival shooting. I know there was just recently a shooting in Vegas, so I'm trying to make sure you know exactly which one we're talking about. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and thank Oswaldo and Riker for the suggestion for this episode. I didn't know all the things behind this at all, so I really appreciate the suggestion because I learned a lot. And before we get started, I want to say that I'm simply telling you what the conspiracies are here and the evidence behind those conspiracies. Whether or not you choose to believe them is completely up to you. I know, especially when talking about theories like this, when a lot of people died and it hits really close to home, it causes quite the uproar. So please understand that I'm just sharing the theory. That's it. My heart goes out to all of those that have been affected by mass shootings of any kind. I know, I know how hard it can be because my sisters were in a school shooting. I know how scary it can be, just to be waiting and wondering, like, are they okay? So. Please know that this isn't me condoning the shooting by any means. This is just the theories behind the shooting, and many people lost their lives due to this. So it was pretty horrific. However, with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. So on October 1st, 2017, 22,000 people gathered for the last night of the Route 91 Harvest Country Music Festival. So this festival had been held in Paradise, Nevada, in the Las Vegas Village from 2014 to 2017. If you don't know, Paradise is technically where all like the big casinos are. I had to look it up because I was like, isn't it, in Las Vegas? Technically, it's Paradise. In 2017, some of the major acts at the festival were Eric Church, Sam Hunt, Jason Aldean, Jake Owen, Lee Bryce, a bunch of country stars because they had all day. It was an all-day festival for 3 days, so there was a lot of people there. And as with most festivals, it went from Friday through Sunday. So Eric Church was the headliner on Friday, and then Sam Hunt ended the day on Saturday, and on Sunday night, Jason Aldean was headlining. According to the schedule, Aldean was to take the stage at 9:40 p.m. At 10:05 p.m., Stephen Paddock opened fire into the crowd from the corner suite of the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel, which was right across the street. The Luxor was also across the street, and then the Delano Hotel. This matters later. The Delano Hotel, it's kind of like next to the Mandalay Bay, but behind it, if that makes sense, if you're looking at it from where the venue was. So the current official story, which is what I'm telling you right now, is shortly before 10 p.m., a hotel security guard, Jesus Campos, was sent to the 32nd floor to investigate an open door alarm. So nothing weird was going on besides like this open door alarm. So he went up there. So when Campos attempted to open the door that would give him access, like immediate access to the floor, he found that it just wouldn't open. So he went a different route because there's plenty of ways to get onto each floor. And then he went to that door that he was trying to get into, and he found that it was secured by an L bracket. So if you don't know what an L bracket is, it's exactly what it sounds like. So half of it was screwed on to the door, and the other half was screwed on to the frame, so you couldn't actually open it. And of course, he alerted back to everybody else, was like, hey, something weird's going on up here. That's when he heard what he described as rapid drilling coming from room 32135, which was that corner, like that end suite. Paddock used a hammer-like device to break 2 of the windows. So he broke a window in that suite. He also broke a window in the suite right next to it. So he actually had 2 rooms. And the hammer device, they're saying it was kind of like, you know, those devices that you can use to break your car window if you like get submerged in water? Same device. That's how he broke the windows. He had begun firing to the crowd at 10:05, and he started by firing single shots into the crowd. And it's theorized he did this to kind of like get his aim correct. And initially, concert goers kind of just thought it was fireworks because and that's actually really common because it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around the fact that like you might be in danger, and they're also in Las Vegas, so the likelihood of it being fireworks over gunshots is high. You think that people are probably celebrating, everyone's having a good time, it's Vegas. But after the single shots, Paddock starts firing rapidly into the crowd at about 80 to 100 rounds per blast. And he fired 12 different bursts, and we're going to go through all of this. So after the first burst, which was at 10:05, Paddock is alerted that Campos is on the floor and has discovered his secure door. And he knew this because he had rigged the hallway with cameras. He had like a webcam set up that he was alerted to when people were in the hallway. So that's when Paddock fires about 35 rounds through the hotel door, but actually only one of those rounds hit Campos in the leg. Like hit him at all, but it hit him in the leg. So, honestly, pretty good. So that's when Campos took cover in an alcove down the hall. It was like the door to another hotel room, but it was a cutout so he could hide. And he immediately alerted the hotel by radio and by cell phone that he had been shot and that there were shots coming from this room. Now, at the time, he kind of just thought it was like a BB gun or a pellet gun. He didn't really believe that it was like a real gun, but also, if you think about it logically, how would a BB gun or a pellet gun penetrate the hotel door and hit you in the leg? I don't know, but I guess you're probably, again, in the moment, you're probably not thinking about all of that. So I have to try to put myself in the shoes of somebody that's getting shot at, right? They're probably not thinking rationally yet. And at about the same time, a maintenance man had come up to fix the door that Campos had found secured shut. So, he was called because there's like, hey, something's wrong with his door. Come fix it. And Campos saw the maintenance man and told him to take cover because something's going on. He was hitting the leg. Something weird's going on. And the maintenance man had also informed the hotel of the shooting and told them to call the police. So we've got 2 people on the floor being like, hey, something weird is happening. Call somebody about it. 36 seconds after the first burst, the second burst is fired into the crowd. So this dude is busy, right? Like he fires the first burst, then he fires into the hallway, and then he fires into the crowd again. He was aiming around like the front of the concert venue up near the stage because naturally that's where the densest part of the crowd was because people are trying to get to the front to see Jason Aldean performing, or any person at any concert, but like in this case, it was Jason Aldean. And then there's another pause in the bursts, and this time for 17 seconds. So at 10:07, the third burst of gunshots starts, and this time it's inferred that he is just like spraying the bullets. He's not looking at one condensed spot, he's just kind of all over the place. 20 seconds later, the fourth burst hits the crowd. All the while, during the breaks and gunfire, concertgoers are trying to flee because they figured out, like, we are being shot at. Like, something's wrong. But a lot of them are just kind of, like, on the ground sheltering in place because they still don't know. They don't know where the gunshots are coming from. And it seems silly to us now. We're like, yeah, they're coming from above you. Go, get away. But they didn't know that they were coming from above them. They thought that they were coming from, like, just the side. So they just got down. At this point, we had almost a 2-minute break in gunshots, which is weird. Like, what was he doing? What's going on in this 2-minute break? It's really unsure what he was doing. Before, it makes sense that he was likely reloading his gun, but this is quite a long break. And it is possible that he fires down the hallway again, but last time there was only a 36-second break, and this time it's almost 2 minutes. It's like a minute, 50 seconds or something like that. So Like, what are you doing for that time? It's also possible that he was changing hotel rooms because he had the corner suite and he had the room right next to it, and he had broken out windows in both of them. So, like, was he just going to the other hotel room to get a different vantage point? I don't know. But because of this longer break, a lot of people got up and they moved to safety because they were like, cool, like, maybe we're done being shot at. So they just, like, ran. And good on them because they probably won't get shot if they're running in a break. But they don't know, like, are there more bullets coming? What's going on? So at 10:08, the first police car showed up on the scene, and they were moving along the sidewalk outside the concert venue. So they were on the concert venue side of the street because the Mandalay Bay is across the street. And they were yelling at concert goers to go back into the venue because they didn't know where, like, they knew the shots were coming from across the street, but they didn't know from where. So again, everyone's assuming that they're coming from a guy on the ground, and in fact, they're coming from somebody up high. So these people that are trying to escape the danger because they're like, we're getting shot in the concert venue, and then the cops are like, go back into the concert venue. So it's very confusing, very chaotic scene, I imagine. And at this time, they also weren't sure if the shots were coming from the Mandalay Bay or if they were coming from the Luxor Hotel, which is across the street as well. So they could have been coming from either of those hotels. No, really, nobody knew what was going on. At 10:10, the fifth burst went into the crowd. Just 40 seconds after that, on a video, you can hear more gunshots, but they sound far away. And it's inferred that Paddock is firing indoors again. So that he's shooting in the hotel. Although later on we'll get into that. There's not a lot of evidence of him shooting into the hotel, but that's not that. We'll get into that in a little while. And then there's another long break. So this time the break was just over a minute long, and it again allowed more people to actually exit the concert venue. And then we get the sixth burst of fire, and 20 seconds after that, in the seventh burst, it seems he's aiming at the police because they're down on the sidewalk, they're just across the street from the hotel, and they're still outside the concert venue. And about 20 feet away from those police officers, there's more police in the intersection, and they're hiding behind a patrol car because they're getting shot at. And eventually, officers actually spot the muzzle flashes coming from the Mandalay Bay and send officers over there. And during this burst of fire, an officer was shot. By this time, about 6 minutes after the shooting began, the area near the stage, near stage right, was mostly cleared out. So all those people had left, but the area near stage left, they all got down. And actually, if you look at pictures of it, it would be really hard if you were one of the people near stage left to get up and leave because there's just bodies everywhere, and not necessarily dead bodies. Maybe people were shot, maybe there are dead bodies, it's unclear. But there's just a lot of people down on the ground because they're trying to duck and take cover. So if you got up and tried to leave, you'd be stepping on people and you'd trip and you'd fall, and it would actually be really cumbersome. So it makes sense that if stage right they were all leaving, then they all left. And stage left, if they were all staying, then they all had to stay because they were just blocking the way of other people. And then the eighth burst happens. And then the ninth burst happens. And we have videos. Actually, it's really convenient that people, all kinds of people in lots of different YouTubes and Rumble videos that I saw, they took a bunch of people's videos and timestamped them and put them all together so you could kind of get a pretty good overview of what was going on at the time. So right now we have a video taken, and this is just after the ninth burst of gunfire, from a taxi driver. And this taxi driver is under the awning in front of the Mandalay Bay. And he shows hotel guests that are just standing around, and he doesn't show any cops in the area at all. In his video, you can hear the gunshots, and they sound close, but the taxi driver doesn't know the shots are being fired into the concert right across the street from him. And he rolls down his window to tell the hotel guests that are standing right there outside the hotel, waiting for their Uber or whatever they're doing, waiting for friends, that there's shots being fired. Hey, you guys should take cover, somebody's shooting. At the same time, the police were already in the building. And they were on the 31st floor, and they reported that they heard shots coming from the floor above them. But Paddock was unaware that the police were near. And that's when he was like, cool, let's keep shooting, right? He wasn't done yet. So he released the 10th burst of fire into the crowd. And more police were approaching the scene. Like, more and more people were coming on the scene because there's a mass shooting happening and we got to figure out what the heck. But over the radio, officers are heard saying, quote, "Control, we need all units stop coming northbound on Las Vegas Boulevard because he's shooting this way. It's a horrible cover spot," end quote. And between the 10th and 11th burst of fire, there was about a 1 minute and 11-second pause. And then he fired like a shorter burst for the 11th burst of fire, and then the 12th burst was his final burst, and that was fired at 10:15 p.m. And this burst was only about 50 rounds, and it was fired slower than the other bursts of fire, so it must have been a different gun. Some people are like, well, maybe his gun was malfunctioning, maybe he changed weapons. Later we find out he had like 23 or 25, I can't remember, I have it in my notes somewhere, guns in his room, so he could have easily just changed guns, which would cause it to be different, why he only shot 50 rounds and why the gun shots were slower. And right away, right after that, like at 10:17, officers got to the 32nd floor, and that's when they ran into Campos, who was still just like ducking for cover because, again, it's only been, at this point 17 minutes, and he keeps hearing the gunshots and he doesn't know like what's going on. Nobody does, right? At 10:22, more police were making their way to the 32nd floor, and the first officers didn't want to continue without backup. So they're kind of like waiting for backup, which makes sense. They have to protect themselves as well. And then they began to evacuate guests as they work their way down the hall. So they're just evacuating everybody. At 10:55, the officers finally finished evacuating guests, which I don't know why it took so long. I'm not a police officer. I don't have any police officer friends. I can't just like call somebody up and ask them. Otherwise, I totally would. I'm sure they were just probably like clearing everyone and making sure everything was good. At 11:20, the police finally breached the door of room 135 with explosives, and they enter the room. That's when they find 23 guns. See, I knew I had it in here somewhere. And hundreds of rounds of ammunition, mini magazines, a broken window, and one suspect. It's estimated that he fired around 900 rounds into the concert and about 200 into the hallway. Stephen Paddock was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So the suspect was there. He was dead already. It's unclear when, but Paddock also fired 8 bullets into a large jet fuel tank at McCarran International Airport, which was only 2,000 feet away. 2 of those bullets hit the tank. Only one of them actually penetrated the tank. But the fuel didn't explode because jet fuel is mostly kerosene, and it is unlikely to ignite when it's struck by a bullet. Like, it needs a lot to blow up. So it did not blow up, luckily. But after the shooting, or during the shooting, the airport had to shut down for hours because about 300 people had entered the airport grounds because they were fleeing the concert. And then more than 25 flights had to be rerouted to ensure no aircraft was hit by gunfire because, again, they just like didn't know what was happening. They had no idea. The number of deaths relating to this is unclear. Initially, 58 were reported dead. 58 people died that night. 36 of them were women and 22 were men. 31 victims pronounced dead at the scene. 27 died at the hospital. 2 days after the shooting, another person died from their wounds at the hospital. They had been in the hospital the whole time. 2 years later, a woman died who had been paralyzed during the shooting. And at first, they didn't want to include her in the death toll, but eventually kind of gave in because she died of complications of her wound, which was a result of the concert. In 2020, another woman died from complications due to a leg wound she'd received. And again, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department didn't want to include her in the death toll either, but they also gave in to that. So you've got the death toll at 60 people right now. I haven't finished yet. This, again, is not including Paddock. A victim of the shooting would later commit suicide, and officially she is not part of the death count. However, she did commit suicide because of the mental health issues and the trauma she received from the shooting. So I believe wholeheartedly that she should be part of the death count. In 2022, another victim who had survived but lived with chronic panic attacks because you were in a mass shooting, the largest shooting in American history. She was just sitting at a friend's kitchen when she passed out and she never came to, and they found out the paramedics declared her dead from cardiac arrest. So, the director of the Vegas Strong Resilience Center said the center is aware of several people who have suffered fatal heart problems because of panic attacks, because of the shooting. Like, they have panic attacks because of the shooting, but it's unclear just how many, and it's really unclear just how many deaths because of this, because I'm sure other people have probably committed suicide due to their mental health issues they've had from this. I watched a video, which was a news report shortly after, like I think 3 or 4 weeks after the shooting, and it was this guy saying how he has 5 or 6 nightmares every single night, and in the middle of the night he gets up and he has to go sleep in a closet because he literally like can't function. So the mental health issues, the toll that this was taking on people was unbelievable. Over 500 people were wounded, but it's unclear, again, just how many people were wounded because you're not only accounting for physical wounds. Like, I would bet that 98% of the people coming out of this had some sort of mental health issues. 22,000 concertgoers and first responders and bystanders were affected by this tragedy. The death toll, like I said, will never be fully tallied because people are going to continue to suffer with what they went through. And also, if people are dying from cardiac arrest, from panic attacks, that could happen at any time. So, but it's also hard to relate that back, which is why the LVMPD, doesn't want to include them in the death toll, because you can't really, if they're having cardiac problems from panic attacks, you can't necessarily say that's 100% from this shooting. So they will never include them in the death toll. Anyway, who is Stephen Paddock, right? Like, this guy committed the most horrific shooting in American history. So who is he? He was a 64-year-old former auditor and real estate businessman. So he had grown up with a single mom and his 2 brothers. His dad was a bank robber and he was in prison. So dude wasn't around. Paddock worked while he was in college, he worked as a postal worker, and then he worked for the IRS until 1984, and in 85 he was an auditor for the Defense Contract Audit Agency. Then toward the end of the 80s, he was an internal auditor for a company that later merged with Lockheed Martin. Not sure what company that was, but obviously a defense contractor of some sort. Paddock had run a real estate business with his brother. He owned 2 apartment buildings in California and 1 in Texas because he had lived both in California and in Texas. He was currently residing in California. I think he mostly lived in California. He just lived in Texas for a short stint. And he sold off his real estate business and was worth millions after that. I mean, he owns multiple apartment buildings, so makes sense. But he was an avid gambler. He loved video poker. And he had made decent money from that as well, although it's unclear like just how much money he had made from gambling. But he was sometimes in the high limit room, but he wasn't necessarily known as like a high stakes gambler. He wasn't considered a whale, and that's what a lot of people point to as the motive, is that he wasn't considered a high stakes gambler and they didn't offer all these promotions. I guess they used to offer like free cruises and all these different things they would give to these high stakes gamblers, but they stopped doing that. And so a lot of people are like, that's his motive, because he wasn't considered high stakes, even though he often spent a lot of money at the casinos, and they didn't give him all these giveaways, which doesn't actually make any sense. Between October 2016 and September 2017, Paddock purchased 55 firearms. Most of them were rifles. However, before that, he had purchased about 29 firearms, and that was between the years of 1982 and 2016. So that's not even a gun a year. And honestly, like, that's a long time. I don't see that being outrageous. I think 55 in a year is a lot, but 29 basically in his entire life before that wasn't that much. He had been married twice and divorced both times, but he didn't have any kids. And he had a girlfriend at the time. She was Filipino. And 2 weeks prior to the shooting, he surprised her with a ticket to the Philippines. And soon after she arrived there, he sent her $100,000 to buy a house there, which kind of shows that he wasn't really hurting for money. And he hadn't lost all his money to gambling. It wasn't like he was in like gambling debt at all. He wasn't. Between sending his girlfriend off and the shooting, he had been spotted with another woman. She's suspected to be a sex worker, and she was cleared of any connection to the shooting. She was just somebody he was hanging out with on the side, if you know what I mean. On September 25th, Paddock checked into the hotel room. This, again, official story. Things changed a lot, so we'll get into that. He had 10 range bags and a computer with him. He didn't move into the second room until the 29th of September. Or the 28th. It's unclear if it was the 28th or 29th, but he had gotten the second room on one of those 2 days. But he still had the first room too. He had both rooms now. And during the investigation, computer forensics found hundreds of images of child pornography on his computer. And it's still unknown what the motive was, but it's suspected that he worked alone. The police say he worked alone. It was just him by himself, lone shooter. Which is quite the cute little story, right? Lone shooter was pissed off, shot into a concert for no reason, and that's it. Case closed, put a bow on it, go home. However, if you start actually looking into this thing, none of that, there's no way. The problem is that just like a lot of this just doesn't add up. Why would a guy who seemed to be pretty well off randomly commit such a violent act? And yes, he was addicted to video poker, but he still had money. Like I said, he hadn't lost it all to gambling, and he didn't have any gambling debts at all. And his girlfriend said that she wasn't worried about his mental health. And later on, when they talked to his brother was like, what? It was my brother did this? He had no idea. There was no indication at all that this guy was going to do something like this. During the autopsy, they didn't find any brain abnormalities. Like, there's just, I don't know. The FBI said that they couldn't find a motive, and they just gave up. Case closed. This is the deadliest shooting in American history, and no one will talk about it. YouTube changed their algorithm to censor the conspiracy theories about this shooting. In fact, there's articles in like the New York Times and like big media outlets that said YouTube had to change their algorithm. They didn't say censor. They said change their algorithm because too many people were looking at the conspiracy theories. The conspiracy theories had bubbled up to the surface, and so the first thing that you would see when you YouTubed this shooting was the conspiracy theories. So they changed their algorithm, and now you can't find them at all. And in fact, it was really hard to find anything about this shooting. So a lot of the information that I got about it was from Wikipedia, because a lot of, like, I got some things from, obviously all my sources are in the show notes, but it's really hard to find the things about this conspiracy. But don't you worry, because I did it just for you guys. So first things first, about 45 minutes before the shots were fired, there was a lady that had pushed her way to the front of the venue, and she was saying that they were all going to die tonight. And this lady was escorted out of the concert by security. Again, 45 minutes before the shooting. Another lady was on the news telling the story about this lady. Like, she didn't know who the lady was, but she was on the news telling the story. That lady that was on the news telling the story, she was found dead. It's unclear as to how she died, but she was found dead after she gave that news report. There is the ISIS connection. So right after the shooting, ISIS took credit for the massacre. So basically they came out, they were like, yep, it was us, like, we did it. They claimed that Paddock converted to Islam about 6 months before the shooting, and they put out this infographic that depicted what happened that night. This infographic came out like 4 days after the shooting and stated, quote, "A soldier of the caliphate attacked a gathering of 22,000 Americans at a concert in the city of Las Vegas, resulting in nearly 60 killed and 600 injured," end quote. They also called him by his Islamic name, which was Abdul Bar al-Amriki. The publication continued, quote, "Brother Abu Abdul Bar stationed himself in the room on the 32nd floor of the hotel overlooking the concert and opened fire continuously on the crowds using 23 firearms and more than 2,000 bullets and died. May God accept him after running out of ammunition," end quote. This claim by ISIS is looked at as false because they do like to take credit for a lot of things, but that they had nothing to do with. So there's all kinds of things that you're like, why are you taking credit for that? Basically, any casualty event that happened in America, they're taking credit for, right? Well, but this at least gives a motive to like why Paddock like may have done this, because there's not really any other reason. I don't know. Maybe we'll get into other things later on, but there's not like a whole lot of reasons as to why he would do this. So this gives a reason. But again, everyone in his life was completely dumbfounded and taken by surprise at the fact that Paddock was the shooter. But this may have been the reason that he did it, because maybe not everyone in his life knew that he converted 6 months earlier. Maybe this was his way of, proving himself to ISIS. I don't know. That's one of the theories, right? There's the other shooter theories, which we're going to get into a lot more. But the other shooter theories suggest that there was another shooter. There's a couple theories here. The first one suggested that there was another shooter on the 4th floor of the hotel. So there's this video while Big and Rich is singing "God Bless America." And in this video, you can see the hotel in the background, and they kind of pan over to show like the view of where they're at, what's going on. And you can see these flashes coming from a dark room on about the 4th floor. I can't verify that's 100% the 4th floor, but that's what everyone's saying it is. The window of this room is not broken, so I'm not 100% sure about this. It could have just been a strobe light in a dark room. Maybe it's muzzle blasts. I don't know, but that's one of the theories that's out there. But here's the thing. They breached the room at the end of the hall where most of the shooting was coming from, right? So they had this room at the end of the hall. And that's where Paddock was found dead with all the weapons. But they didn't initially go into the room next door that also had a broken window. Campos, who was down the hall hiding, didn't see Paddock switching rooms, which I did suggest that maybe that was one of the reasons for the break earlier when I was going over like the different bursts and how long the breaks were in between them. But Campos would have seen Paddock switching rooms or like heard something, like he would have and the security guy, somebody would have seen something. They were in the hallway. I didn't find any reporting that he had switched rooms at any point. So what's to say that there wasn't a second shooter in the other room? And maybe they got evacuated with the others when the police were evacuating the floor. I don't know. This is just a theory I came up with about second shooter possibly, because if there was a second shooter in the room, that makes more sense to me. But again, just a theory. I'm just showing the theories. Later on, we're going to get pretty deep into other shooter theories. So this is just a couple of the smaller ones. So hang on to your britches because it's going to get wild. There is the theory that the deep state Democrats planned it, which again goes along with some stuff we're going to get into in just a little while. So, but I'll tell you the surface level of this is that there's a couple things that go with this. Firstly, that it was planned to start a civil war. Now, this would coincide with the 100th anniversary of Lenin's Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Secondly, that it's a ploy to implement more gun control, which goes along, that one specifically goes along with the theory we're going to talk about in a bit. So basically, every time there is a mass shooting, the government officials, typically Democrats, use it as a way to push gun control laws and or take our guns away. So I kind of have that idea in the back of my head every single time, whether they planned it like it was a conspiracy or maybe it really was just like a mass shooter. It's always a way to take our guns away or to implement more gun control laws. And in fact, with this shooting, we saw they're trying to ban bump stocks. And the reason this came about is Paddock used bump stocks to help automate his semi-automatic rifles. Potentially. I mean, you can't verify that they actually use the bump stocks at all, or that he used those weapons because there's 23 of them in the room. Did they all have bump stocks on them? It's unclear. So there's another theory that Paddock was a Democrat himself, and this theory says that he was a Hillary and Obama supporter and a member of Antifa. So typically, and I'm generalizing here, country music listeners are Republican. I'm not saying every single one of them is. I'm just saying, like, typically when you think of country music, you think of like more conservative type people. And in fact, more recently, Jason Aldean and his wife Brittany have been pretty open about their political views. And they do fully support the right. They're Trump supporters all the way. This is all over their social media. You can go check it out. I'm not making this up. So if Paddock was a member of Antifa, it would make sense as to why he would want to shoot into a country concert, which is a group of conservative people, typically. And I'm not, again, there could be plenty of Democrats in the country concert venue. I don't know. There's no way to know if all the people were conservative or if they even cared about politics at all. Some people just don't care. But that wouldn't have mattered to him if he's like a alt-left terrorist, right? Like an Antifa member who's just like, I'm going to kill as many conservative people as possible because they don't believe the way I believe. Which, again, I know not all liberal left-leaning people are like this. That's just typically what we see from terrorists. And if he really was like a member of Antifa, then he took it even further, went all the way left and shot into a group of conservatives or a group of people that he deemed were conservatives, right? And the Melbourne Antifa group also came forward and took credit for this shooting. Melbourne being like, Australia. And they were like, yep, we did it. But there's not a whole lot of evidence to support that. And that was just kind of like a one-off theory I heard. But I thought I'd include it for you anyway. There's this theory that Trump was in Vegas and was supposed to be meeting with the Prince of Saudi Arabia, or that there was just a prince from Saudi Arabia there, and that the shooting was they were trying to kill the prince. I couldn't actually. So one of you guys actually messaged me about this. I could not, for the life of me, and I looked everywhere, I could not find the theory. And like I said, it's been really hard to find all the theories and everything behind this particular shooting because they tried their hardest to cover it all up. So this theory about the Saudi Arabian prince, I couldn't find it. But either way, the general theory that the listener had written into me was that they were just trying to kill either Trump or the prince or both if they were meeting. But it's hard to find anything about the Saudi Arabian prince. There are some pretty inconsistent stories when it comes to Jesus Campos. So he's a pretty key member of this story, right? So he was shot in the leg in the hallway. During the shooting, it was supposed to, he went up there before the shooting started, and I don't know, that was the official story, right? But his story changed several times. And actually, so he was supposed to do some interviews, and he backed out last minute from all the interviews. So the question is, like, was he threatened? Like, why did he back out? In the days after the shooting, his story changed so many times. So at first, he was shot before the mass shooting started. Then he was shot after Paddock had finished shooting into the concert, but before he had killed himself. The story I told earlier had him being shot during the mass shooting between the first and second bursts. So, like, what's the deal with this guy, right? Like, was he in on it? Was he actually just like an innocent bystander? But even the hotel had like weird stories, because at first the MGM put out that Paddock had checked into his hotel room on the 28th, and then it was the 25th, which the 25th was the story I told you earlier, because that's the official report now. Could it be that he checked into his second room on the 28th? And then my source saying that he checked into his room on the 29th was wrong. Like I said earlier, when I mentioned the 29th, I don't know if it was the 28th or the 29th that he checked into the second room, because the sources vary. There's just too many questions around the stories that they're selling us on the mass media. And then there's the question that I don't think you guys were expecting me to say, but was Stephen Paddock even the shooter? Did you expect that? Because I feel like every conspiracy theory has somebody that was the shooter but wasn't actually the shooter, right? So Stephen's brother was so adamant that this was not like his brother. He was like, this is not like Stephen. This is not the guy I know. And with the lack of motive, it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around the fact that somebody would just like randomly decide to shoot into a concert. And actually, they say that he was scouting out other concerts in the weeks leading up to this. So he did end up shooting into this concert, but there was a Life is Beautiful festival also going on, which is just about like, enjoying your life and being really positive, but also it was like a music concert just like this one. He decided not to shoot into that one and shoot into this one instead. It's unclear why he changed his plans, but he actually apparently looked into several different concerts before choosing this. But was it even Paddock that was there? So, if you think back to my clones episode, we went over President Biden's earlobes. I know you know where I'm going with this, because you know that if you listen to that episode, you know that your earlobes are either attached or unattached, and you are born like that and you die like that, unless you accidentally get into an accident and you like rip your earlobe, right? But typically that doesn't happen. You have either attached or unattached earlobes. Ears, actually, I found out in the research of this episode that ears are just as identifiable as fingerprints because they're that unique to everyone. So the way your cartilage is positioned in your ear, not everybody's ear is like that. So we can learn a lot about a person by looking at their ears. Well, the person they found dead in the hotel room had an unattached earlobe. If you look at pictures of Paddock, any time in his entire life, he's got attached earlobes. And in fact, you can look at the cartilage and you can see that it looks nothing like the cartilage or the way Paddock's ears are configured. Like, not even close. There's different ridges. There's ridges that are in the person. Whoever's dead in the hotel room, they have ridges in their ear that Paddock didn't have at all. And they're very prominent ridges. So it's not like you have to look really closely and tilt your head to the left and squint your eyes to notice it. If you put those two ears together, you're like, no, that's not the same person at all. In some of the crime scene photos, you can see livor mortis has set in. So livor mortis is different from rigor mortis. Rigor mortis, it like makes you really like a stone, right? Like a statue. Livor mortis is the settling of the blood in a dead body. So the person that is, I'm not going to refer to them as Paddock anymore because I don't even know if it is him, but the person that is in the photos, in the crime scene photos, that is dead in the hotel room, they are lying flat on their back. They had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, supposedly. So they're lying flat on their back. And in this photo, you can see that there's a line, and the line goes to just above their ear, but they're lying on their back, so from the back of their head to just above their ear. And it's like up to that line, it's like red and purple-ish. You can see clearly that above that line, so their entire face is like white, and all their blood had settled to the back of their head. Well, this level of livor mortis doesn't usually set in until about 6 to 8 hours after the person has died. It takes that long for like the blood to fully settle and then for you to actually see the red purplish start to appear. 6 to 8 hours after this person has died. And the police had breached the hotel room only an hour after he is said to have killed himself. And this picture in particular is taken around 11:30 p.m. So an hour, 20 minutes, give or take? No, it had to be an hour, 10 minutes after this guy would have killed himself. There's no way that livor mortis would have set in that quickly. It's impossible. In the autopsy, they never released a time of death. They listed the time of death at noon on October 2nd, which is like the time that they conducted the autopsy, not the time of death. And this is pretty odd in such a major case. There have been rumors that the original time of death was 8 hours before the shooting started. That has not been confirmed because there's not an official time of death, and autopsies are public knowledge, and so anybody can just get on and look at an autopsy report. So they did not post a time of death because that would have given away that this person had been dead for well past the time, like well before the time of shooting. So they couldn't have been the ones to shoot to commit the crime. But also in the autopsy, it is claimed that the man that they found in the hotel room had brown eyes and was 6 foot 1 inches tall. Well, Paddock had his pilot's license, so he had to get regular flight physicals, what we called them in the Navy, regular flight physicals, and then he had to turn them into the FAA, which again is public record. Anybody can go look them up. Well, in his flight physical, he has blue eyes and he's 6 foot 3 inches tall. Not 6'1" and not with brown eyes. And the autopsy didn't mention any scars on this man's back, but Paddock had a back surgery, so he would have had a scar back there because at some point he had a pretty major back surgery. It's unclear as if they put hardware in his back or not, and that was never mentioned in the autopsy. So if he did have hardware in his back, which we don't know the answer to that, it was never reported in the autopsy, but this person doesn't seem to be Stephen Paddock, if you're going by the evidence. Also, just a side note, the thing identifying that the body was Stephen Paddock was the fingerprints, but there's no chain of custody for the fingerprints, so they're inadmissible at court. Because you have to have a chain of custody because you have to make sure that they weren't tampered with. And if there's no chain of custody, they can't be used as evidence. There's no chain of custody. So somebody just put Stephen Paddock's fingerprints in the report and was like, yep, that's the guy that did it. Let's get into the helicopters, because this is kind of like a smoking gun. So in Vegas, as with many tourist places, there are helicopter tours, right? And they go up and they go all the way down the strip, and then they come back up the strip, and then they land again, and you went on a 30-minute tour or however long, right? You got to see the strip from above. Cool. Yay. And people pay a good amount of money for these, like $200. That night, the night of the shooting, there are 3 helicopters that were doing the helicopter tours. They went up, they went all the way down to the end of the strip. They were coming back, and right before they passed behind the Mandalay Bay, they turned off their transponders. This happened right like 20 minutes before the shooting started. I don't have specifics as to when they turned their transponders back on or when they landed, because their transponders didn't turn back on while they were still flying. In Class Bravo airspace, it is federally illegal to turn off your transponder for any reason. And just so you know, Class Bravo airspace, which is the most common airspace, is for very busy airports that have passenger and cargo planes coming in and out of them. So that 100% identifies Las Vegas' international airport, because first of all, it's an international airport, and secondly, I don't know if you've looked up flights to Vegas lately, but because they want you to go there and spend your money, they're super cheap, and people are flying there from everywhere. Regional airports, international airports, all over the country, people are flying in and out of Vegas. It's a busy airport. And not only that, you have the cargo planes going in and out, you have private jets going in and out, and you have these tourist helicopters going up. There's no way, like, it's completely illegal to be turning off your transponder. There was a concert goer who had a high definition GoPro strapped to them, which happened to be just very convenient, because as this person is like running for their lives and exiting the venue, they continued to record what was going on, because they probably didn't even think to turn off the GoPro, honestly. If you slow down this video, because it's high definition, you can see a lot. You can clearly see flashes of light at different elevations in between the Mandalay Bay and the Delano Hotel, and in between the Mandalay Bay and Luxor. So this, I can't say 100% that it was these helicopters, but something weird is going on because in the airspace between them. You can see this video. I linked to a Rumble video that I watched about this, which has a lot of this information. That's linked in my show notes. It's like a 5-hour video. The first hour and a half has a lot of meat and potatoes. This is in the first 30 minutes that he's going over the helicopters, but you can see this video, or if you just go to the other website I linked, which was vegastruth.org, they have each of the individual videos, and you can see this video on that website, and it's just this video. You can make whatever assumption you want to make off of it. These flashes of lights are not normal helicopter lights. Typically, you would see a red and green lights, that are your indicator lights, and a steady white light, but that's not the case in this scenario, because all the lights that are typically on an aircraft of any sort, they're very consistent. They're flashing at consistent speeds. They're doing consistent things. The lights that we're seeing in this video, they're super inconsistent and random. They're at different elevations, which is odd, and they kind of have a yellowish tinge to them, whereas the lights that are on a helicopter normally are white or red or green, not a yellowish tinge. The person that found this submitted a FOIA request to the FAA. Even with their transponders off, you could still pick up these helicopters on primary radar. So there's primary radar, there's secondary radar. We went over that in the Malaysia flight episode. If you want to go, I kind of dug more deep into it then. But these helicopters should still be picked up on primary radar, and the FAA is required to keep these records, right? The FAA came back and said they conducted a search of the tail numbers that were provided, because the people that got together up from the vegastruth.org website, they got together, they submitted it with tail numbers because they could go and find out the tail numbers. And the FAA was like, yeah, we couldn't find anything about these tail numbers at all. We conducted a search, there's nothing, which is complete bullshit, because you have to keep in Class Bravo airspace, they have to have a record of everything that went on. Has anybody heard of 9/11? Because that was when a lot of rules changed about flights and keeping records and all of that. But speaking of 9/11, the man that signed for this FOIA request, which if you don't know what FOIA, it's Freedom of Information Act, that man was named Michael Artist. Coincidentally, he was working at the National Transportation Management Office on 9/11. He was tracking Flight 93, which makes it even more bullshit that the FAA didn't have the records, because he would be the guy that knows that they have to track these records. He knows all the information. He knows that they have to have the data, because he was part of the person that would help implement it. Dude's done some pretty serious things when it comes to flight information. And he's the one that signed this letter saying, no, we don't have anything on that. But there is always the possibility that that information was deleted by somebody. Could it have been him? Potentially. Could it be the FBI? Possibly. I'm not pointing fingers at people. I'm just stating that maybe the information was deleted so they actually don't have it. Or maybe they're just keeping it pretty close to them because they don't want you to know, which is, I'm pretty sure, is against the FOIA. That's the whole reason of the Freedom of Information Act, is that we have the freedom to have that information. So for you not to give it to us is illegal. But whatever. There are people that say that these flashes coming from these helicopters were just it's just photography, right? But if you're trying to get a good picture, you wouldn't take it from a helicopter. Still, some people do take pictures when they're on helicopter tours. Naturally, we're all human. We're like, oh, look what we're doing. Typically, people would take videos, I would think, but it's possible. But even then, if you're taking pictures from your cell phone, that flash isn't going to be strong enough for us to see it on a GoPro, however far away we were, because we were pretty far away. It's not like I mean, your iPhone camera is not a very strong flash, right? So the flash would have had to be from like a professional camera, professional photographer, but professional photographers wouldn't have taken a picture from a moving helicopter tour. It just that doesn't make a lot of sense. A better vantage point would have been from on top of one of the hotels if you're going to take pictures of the concert going on, right? But that doesn't seem to be the case. But also, why would the helicopter pilots or the company that owns the helicopters risk federal law just to get pictures? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There are Department of Transportation cameras all over the city. Well, out of all the cameras in the whole city, 2 of them were not working. One of them that was not working happened to be the one that would have shown the airspace between the Mandalay Bay and the Delano Hotel. And it was only offline for a couple hours before the shooting and a couple hours after the shooting, conveniently, obviously missing the shooting and anything that would have happened in between those hotels and including at the hotel during the time. And then it just came back on afterwards, was totally fine. That's odd. It's just a little odd. Let's talk about the windows, because the windows don't make a whole lot of sense either. The windows in these hotels are made to withstand hurricanes, tornadoes, like flying debris, things that are coming at them. They're not going to they're not weak windows in hotels, especially that high up, because it's a liability. They don't want people just like jumping out or falling out or anything to happen, basically. Because if somebody like breaks a window and jumps out, now the family can sue. If somebody like accidentally falls out because the window broke for whatever reason, like the family can sue. It's a huge liability. So they have really strong windows. There are some videos and pictures that show the 32nd floor during the shooting, and the windows are not broken out. In one video, there's a couple at the nearby bus stop, and they're talking about how the cops are there with rifles and told them to take cover because there's shooting. Again, this video was lined up and time-stamped, so they were talking like 10:16 p.m. So after the shooting had basically stopped. And during this video, you hear a single gunshot, and then you hear the woman say, quote, "There's glass falling from the Mandalay Bay," end quote. And then you hear another single gunshot, and then that's it. Like, the shooting is over after that. But it's time-stamped for 10:16. So how did the glass fall from the Mandalay Bay after the shooting stopped? But all the shooting came from the 32nd floor in the Mandalay Bay. And there's no other broken windows. The whole hotel, there's 2 broken windows. That's it. So where's this glass falling from? We're going to talk about ballistics here a little bit. So the Mandalay Bay is at 17 degrees above the venue. So the bullets would be coming down at 17 degrees. But most of the impacts were over 50 degrees. Also, the Mandalay Bay is 300 to 500 yards from the venue-ish, which would put the kinetic energy at like 1672 to 1145 foot-pounds. So that's enough to kill somebody, to actually hurt somebody. The airspace between the hotels where these helicopters are said to have been shooting from, that's somewhere between 600 and 900 yards away, which puts the kinetic energy at 936 to 517 foot-pounds. Which, if you're into hunting or you know anything about hunting, shots under 1,000 foot-pounds are considered unethical because the animals are not likely to die from the shot. You're just going to wound them, and it's inhumane, really. So we actually see that with a lot of the injuries. 450 people were shot with no exit wounds or fatal damage. The people that did die either had head wounds or the bullets happened to hit a vital organ just right. This suggests that the shots were coming from further away, because if they were coming from closer with the proper kinetic energy, more of these wounds, you would have actually seen exit wounds. A lot of these people didn't even have exit wounds. So you would have seen exit wounds and more people would have died. It would have been a lot more deadly had it been actually shot from the 32nd floor. But what's the motive, right? We still, we have all this information, we have all this evidence, but we still don't know, why. Why would you commit such a heinous crime? Why would you do this to your own people? Assuming that it's the government. I don't know. Why would anybody do this to this is awful. Well, there was a man on 4chan, and yes, I get that, not everything on 4chan can be believed, but this man was saying that his name was John, and he was posting on September 17th of 2017. So, I don't know, 3 weeks before the shooting occurred, about how there was going to be an operation called the High Incident Project. And if you Google it, you can't find the High Incident Project anywhere. Some people talk about it on podcasts. I'm talking about it on a podcast. But it's really hard to find information on. He's basically this John guy. He's saying that they want to make people feel unsafe in places that have high security. So somewhere where you think that you would 100% be safe, they're trying to make you feel unsafe there. They want to use this project to implement more regulations, because if you feel unsafe in somewhere that's supposed to be pretty safe, you're going to want even more regulations to make yourself feel safe. So they're going to try to pass laws to put in metal detectors and more security devices. And he said that Vegas was a place that they were pretty heavily considering. John went on to say that if the plan was successful, the state of Nevada will make metal detectors and backscatter machines mandatory in casinos, and then the federal government would jump on board and make them mandatory in places like universities and schools and federal buildings and stuff like that. He continued that OSI and Chertoff are the main producers of the equipment, so they are, of course, going to push for this, and that these two companies will merge around the year 2020, and that the owners will sell their shares and make billions of dollars. Well, Chertoff has ties to 9/11 as well, which is the second time in this conspiracy that 9/11 has come up, because something wonky is going on. But this man from 4chan, he might have been right, because immediately after the shooting, there was a call for body scanners in hotels and gun regulation, which we kind of already talked about, that might be one of the motives for the shooting is gun regulation. And from this post, it was actually covered on a couple of the large media sites. So it was covered on The Forward, Unilad, and Snopes right after the shooting. But as soon as the story started going around, the Vegas shooting dropped off the news. Basically, they stopped talking about it. And I actually remember that, because I remember hearing about this shooting. I remember oh my gosh, there was a shooting in Vegas. It was really bad. I remember hearing that. But I didn't know it was the deadliest shooting in America. I didn't know just how horrific it was or any of the details behind it, because, yeah, it was basically gone. I thought it was not that big a deal. Any shooting is awful. So of course I was like, wow, that really sucks. Oh my gosh. But then stopped hearing about it. So I don't know. It's really weird that as soon as people started circulating what this John guy was saying, then they stopped talking about the shooting altogether, which is the deadliest shooting in America. They're just going to stop talking about it. And this guy, John, he actually signed off he posted 3 different times. The last post, he said, "Don't expect to hear from me anytime soon," and never posted again. But there's some things that kind of suggest that it was pre-planned, because there was some insider trading happening. So in the month of September, there was a lot of abnormal amount of trading for OSI and for weapon-related things. So it is known that when a mass shooting happens, people run out and buy guns and ammo. They buy accessories, they buy weapon things for a couple reasons. Number one, they think that they might be banned. So they're like, cool, let me go grab everything I can before it's banned. Secondly, people are scared and they want to protect themselves and their families. We saw this actually during COVID. I don't know if you guys remember, but for a long time we couldn't find ammo. Everything was sold out everywhere because people were like panicking and they were just buying everything, and also they just weren't putting out ammo in the stores because the government was buying it all up. That's a different conspiracy. I'm not talking about that now, but we see this in any like major tragic event happens or anything abnormal happens, people run out and buy weapons because they need to protect themselves and protect their families. So if you know that a major tragic event is going to happen, you're going to buy stock in weapon companies because that's going to go way up. People are going to be buying all this stuff. So the trading suggests there was foreknowledge of the event. There are just a couple other things I wanted to go over before I let you guys go. So it is speculated. I saw somewhere, it was like kind of a one-off thing, that Paddock chose the 32nd floor because like that's the highest, technically the second highest degree in the Masonic Temple, and this was like an Illuminati Masonic Temple thing. There were freedom of information requests that were sent to the Las Vegas Police Department, and they basically came back and said, nope, you need to talk to federal employees about this. So that tells us right there that the FBI is completely in control of this and they're controlling the narrative. There were a lot of guns in the hotel room. 23, right? There were a lot. There's no denying that because you can see them all over the crime scene photos. But if you have all these weapons, here's some things that just don't make sense, right? You have all these weapons, you have all this ammo, and you were planning to do all of this damage, and you had been in the room for almost a week planning this, wouldn't you have been more prepared, right? So like, for instance, instead of reloading a magazine, so like taking these long pauses to reload a magazine, wouldn't you just have another gun already loaded and ready to go, or have other magazines for that gun? If like maybe that's your favorite gun, maybe that's your favorite type, or you want to use all the magazines and all the ammo for this gun first before moving to another gun. I don't know what your thought process is. I've never planned a mass murder, but you would think that he had all this foresight of what he was going to do. He would have planned out like, okay, I'm going to use this gun first. I have all these magazines, and he would have laid all that out. That it does not take a minute and 11 seconds to change out a magazine, or to just put down the gun and pick up a new gun and shoot. It doesn't take that much time. You could have got a lot more people, right? If that's really the plan, that's something that you could have done. So it's weird that you would not utilize all of your weapons. And why are the guns scattered all around the room? So again, you're looking at this crime scene photos and you see guns all over the floor. You see guns all over the couches, all over the furniture. Why are they scattered everywhere? Wouldn't they be like right next to the broken window where you just used them? Like, did you finish shooting and like throw a gun over your shoulder? That just seems like super chaotic. I mean, I guess I've never been in the brain of a mass murderer before. It just seems really odd. You think that the only gun that wouldn't be right next to the window, or at least somewhere close to the window, would be the gun that he used to kill himself. But instead, you're looking at these crime scene photos, there's just weapons everywhere. And in the crime scene photos, we see some spent shell casings on the floor, but we don't see thousands of rounds worth. The amount of rounds that would have gone into a crowd, they would have been all over the ground because they kind of like fly out everywhere and they bounce when they hit the ground. Like, so they would have been pretty scattered all over the hotel room, but we don't see that. We only see a few of them, like a couple rounds on the ground, and that's it. They also are using this shooting as a reason to ban bump stocks, but they can't prove that bump stocks were used in the shooting, which is an argument the bump stock manufacturers actually used when they were being sued about this, because they're like, well, you're the reason that he could shoot as fast as he did, as rapidly as he did. It's because he had bump stocks. You can't prove that he was actually using bump stocks in that. Like, yes, you can see that a couple of his guns did have them, but that doesn't mean anything. Who even knows if he used that gun at all? You know? The guns in his room are AR-15s. Not all of them, but most of them. And they are supposedly shooting .223 ammo, right? Well, people that are shot and they went to like the hospital and they got their bullet removed, they were saying that the medical team was taking out 7.62 ammo from their bodies, not .223 ammo. And if the majority of the guns that he was shooting were supposed to hold .223 ammo, you think that most people would have that coming out of their bodies and not 7.62 ammo. That seems weird. There were overlapping rates of fire, which would mean that there were more than one gun going off at the same time. So more than one shooter, more than one gun, maybe one guy holding two guns. I don't know. That seems odd. You think that it would be more than one shooter, right? And the media tried to spin that as echoes coming off other buildings, but echoes change the pitch of the sound, not the rate of fire. So if you have multiple guns going off at the same time and you're hearing that in videos, you're hearing that, like people are hearing that, it's not the echoes. That's for sure. And if Paddock wasn't the one in the room, then where is he, right? So you have this random guy that's dead in the room. If we're to believe that part, I'm just posing some questions here. Was he still like somehow involved? Because according to the hotel records, these are his rooms and he paid for them. And the person they did find that supposedly died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound had a rifle with a bipod attached propped up over his body. So did he place himself under this gun before killing himself? And who is that guy? Like, nobody's missing these people? They just happen to find somebody that looks like Stephen Paddock? Why not actually just use the real Stephen Paddock? I have more questions. And at 11 p.m., so 45 minutes after the shooting allegedly stopped, 911 was still receiving phone calls about shots being fired all over Vegas. And we hear shots being fired, like that sound further away, in several of the videos. And I said earlier when I was going over the timeline that they thought that was just him shooting into the hotel. But, like, who was he shooting at? It wasn't like people were just, like, barging down, like, banging down his door. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I actually never found anything about the supposed shots that went off in his room. So, what did the door have gunshots through it? The FBI had asked for cell phones of concertgoers, and the people that went to the concert, they willingly handed over their devices. They're like, yeah, anything I can do to help catch this guy, right? Like, they're just trying to be good, solid people. When they got their phones back, they noticed that things were missing from their phones. Like, their phones were completely wiped. They didn't have any pictures or videos or anything from that night. And the pictures and videos that we do have are only from those that didn't hand over their devices to the FBI. So let that be a warning to you that you should never willingly give your devices, because they're going to wipe everything, because they don't want you to know the truth. So the more they wipe, the more they cover up, the more they don't want you to know the truth, the more that we need to find out what the truth is. And I'm sure there's more on this. I'm sure there's something about the gunshots in the actual hotel room that I just didn't find, and maybe I just didn't look hard enough for that. I was so caught up on the helicopters and that Stephen Paddock isn't even actually the guy in the hotel room potentially, and all these other things. I kind of got lost. But until next week, my friends, Happy New Year. I'm so glad to be in the year 2024 with you. It's going to be a fantastic year for this podcast and for us together. So thank you for hanging out with me, and stay skeptical, my friends. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.